Welcome to the second week. We have a pretty exciting show. I think one that we both unreservedly loved and loved well before this and greatly enjoyed rewatching.
Yeah, David Milch's Deadwood. In my mind, maybe the best of the early, the golden age of prestige TV on HBO.
Yeah, Richard Yates was a lion of American literature. No one could quite capture the corrosive tension and soul-killing regret in the minds of Americans in the middle of the century quite like he could. It's a hack trope at this point for someone to set out to write the great American novel, but if you put a gun to my head and asked me to pick one that already exists, it would probably be Revolutionary Road. Yates's relationship to mass media, however, was as strained and difficult as those he portrayed in his writing. People have tried to adapt his writing into films and missed much of what made it great in the first place. For lack of a better term, the vibe is off. They can't quite isolate what made his writing special, the soul-crushing yearning for something that isn't quite out there, and the constant nagging feelings. That isn't really unusual for writers, but it doesn't stop there. Larry David famously dated his daughter, and was so moved that he based Elaine Bennis on her. David himself was so moved by the novelist's wasp's stoicism and seriousness that he immortalized one incident in the Seinfeld episode, The Jacket. That was it for him, arguably the greatest American writer, and he is translated in mass media as Some Girl's Dad. His writing is put in the fly machine and turned into a middle-tier drama, the kind of thing that high schoolers sneak into when they just need a place to be in between smoking mids off a Sprite can in 2006. Maybe that's why when Yates found a protege in a very young David Milch, he felt personally betrayed when Milch decided to become one of the greatest and most influential TV writers of all time. There is a rumor that's been around for years that Milch convinced Yates to write a screenplay just for the money. What Yates produced may be floating around somewhere, if it exists. If it actually is, I choose to believe what I've heard about it, that it's the most beautiful screenplay ever written. Why wouldn't it be? Most screenplays are works of science more than they are art. The writers, through sheer familiarity with the process, know exactly what parts of your brain to tickle dramatically to maintain the perfect level of engagement. By the time that Yates may have written this, the art of screenwriting was similar to how McDonald's researchers can figure out the perfect ratio of chemicals to addict you to their food forever. Yates, on the other hand, was a Michelin star chef. Despite what may have happened between Yates and Milch, one thing was clear. Milch was the marriage of the technical genius, the greatest TV writers the world had seen, and the tonal genius of his mentor. He got his start on the small screen by writing a script for Hill Street Blues, one of the common ancestors to most American TV dramas. It was so well received that he ended up as an executive producer and story editor for 5 seasons. After that, he wrote and produced NYPD Blue, an early entry into the anti-hero genre that was based on Milch's friendship with Bill Clark, a former NYPD detective. Milch could definitely make a McDouble that satisfied people, but maybe a more apt comparison would be something like a Five Guys. NYPD was something a cut above most cop procedurals. It was still fast food, but there was a quality and a self-awareness that other competitors did not have. What he made next, however, is unlike anything that has happened before or since on American television. There's very little on TV that I could ever compare Deadwood to. It fits in a conversation with The Sopranos and other shows that you could argue are the best ever made, but it's entirely different from all of them. It's more theatrical. Its goals are completely different, and its writing is in a different universe. For as great as the dialogue is on the canon of great shows, Deadwood is something entirely different. Every line has a musical rhythm to it, while retaining a Shakespearean quality where every word tells you something new about the character speaking it. Soliloquies are frequent. Jokes usually have a very long setup, but the payoff, like the rest of the dialogue, is incredibly vulgar. It's vulgar to the point that cocksucker and the use of the word in the show is something that people still laugh about. Deadwood only went on 3 seasons and 1 movie many years later. It was incredibly expensive to make, and I don't think they could have ever made the merchandising money that Sopranos, for instance, could have. It doesn't have that show's level of cultural penetration, nor that of The Wire or Breaking Bad. Like Yates' work, it's lurking in the background of our cultural memory. If someone goes through the trouble of bringing it up, a few of us will go nuts talking about how fucking good it was, but people aren't making constant reference to it in conversation, jokes and memes, in their comparisons to modern politics or anything. David Milch made the perfect meal that nobody ever talks about. It's not forgotten, but it's not exactly in the forefront of our cultural memory, even though it should be. So, when you hear people talk about the greatest show of all time, you have, I'd say, one group of people who says The Sopranos, and I consider myself like in that group. You have another group of people who shouldn't be allowed to vote, who say The Wire. And then there's the smallest group of people, and that's the Deadwood people. But I think the Deadwood people have a great point. This could be. It could be. I mean, I think it's the best writing on any of these.
Yeah, and honestly, the only argument against it is just that it's so truncated. Like, there was clearly a larger overarching idea for a series, and unlike The Sopranos and unlike The Wire, it was not allowed to end on the terms of its creators, which gives it this sort of truncated feeling. And that, I think, works two ways. Some people point to that as why it could never really be as good as one of those other shows. And for the people who really love it, the very fact that it was cut down before it could be completed gives it this potentiality that always will be in their minds as the possibility that Deadwood could have been if it had gotten the full run. I mean, especially when you know about what specifically they were planning for it, the way that it was going to track the actual events of the early Deadwood settlement. There's going to be a big fire that burned down the whole town in the next season, and then we didn't get any of that, and so it's all in your head, which makes it always it's always going to make that more evocative. But in general, I think the writing sets it apart from all the other shows. The number and depth of characters, more than anything, I think, even in the dialogue, points to it, and just the fact, as you said, that it's trying to do something different, which is like the what Milch was trying to get at with Deadwood was not anything specific to the characters, really, or even the Western setting more generally. It was deep questions of like what it means to actually exist as a social being. His original idea for HBO that he pitched was it was going to be a cop show about ancient Rome.
Yes, they were already making Rome. Another very good. That was it. I wouldn't call it a great show, but a very good show that was cut short because of its production cost.
Well, that's funny because that show ended up kind of fucking over Milch twice over because they were developing Rome. They didn't let him do his Roman Empire show or Rome show, and then the cost of the Rome show is one of the things that made them cancel Deadwood. But the premise was he was going to be about ancient Roman police officers in the days before law had been codified in the early Roman Republic. And police officers essentially had to figure out on a day-to-day basis what the law stood for and what it meant. And that was going to be the story. And when they told him, we've got a Roman show, he found another text, another historical moment with that same phenomena, which was after gold was discovered in the Black Hills of South Dakota, which at the time was a treaty recognized Sioux land. A number of speculators broke out illegally from U.S. territory and occupied it in an effort to gain to get the gold there, bringing with them other people who's set up just by virtue of their desire to make some money in this new frontier, a community that had no legal writ underwriting it. It was not part of an American territory. It was all illegal. There was no legal authority in the settlement. And so with that as the backdrop, Milch is able to illustrate what actually goes into people coming into awareness of themselves as parts of a emergent social reality, as opposed to living in one that has already been established and to which they have sort of lost any sort of sense to. In that sense, it's sort of it's kind of a prequel to The Sopranos in that way, in that The Sopranos is at the end stage of that process, because the people in The Sopranos have lived through an American experience where, having gone from building a social order to one in which the social order has become so transparent as to not even be recognizable, and they're sort of back to imagining themselves as individuals, sort of in a wilderness again. But it is a wilderness that has been totally subscribed by institutions and capitalism and mass media in a way that they're not even able to be aware is there. Like it's the water that fish swim in. And Deadwood is about that fucking pool getting filled with water in the first place.
Yeah, to put it very succinctly, I would say Deadwood is about ascendance and Sopranos is about decadence.
Yes.
It's about, they're both sort of about the same thing. And The Sopranos is about them holding on. Like Sopranos is a tragedy more than anything. A Greek tragedy. Like, I think even in that first season when they weren't quite sure what kind of show it was, when Paulie goes into the Starbucks equivalent, it starts bitching about the appropriation of Italian culture and then steals the espresso machine. Like, that's, like, he can't, like the characters in Deadwood, he can't verbalize what he wants. But for him, it slipped out of his fingers. It's already gone. For Deadwood, they're desperately grasping to ground it into the earth.
Yes.
And I would say it's closest thematically to The Sopranos in that way, even though they're dealing with opposite times and opposite directions, just because of the, different eras they take place in. But it is, I think that's the last sort of prestige show that it has anything in common with, or a ton in common with. Like, I don't feel like it has anything in common with Breaking Bad.
No.
I don't feel like it has anything in common really with The Wire, maybe a little bit. Like, all these other shows are kind of about very immediate things, and even their systemic critiques are about very short windows of time. And they avoid trying to say a ton. Like, I think The Wire is a brilliant show, but the reason I don't consider it on the level of Deadwood or The Sopranos is because it tries to make you make the criticism. It doesn't have any of its own, really.
Yeah.
Because it's written from such a lived out perspective, and it's just like, oh, aren't the problems bad?
Yeah.
And but Deadwood is like, well, Deadwood and Sopranos are like, well, the problem is fundamentally human connection, and the solution and problem is both symbol. Deadwood it's about symbol more than anything, I would say, right?
Yeah. Yes. How symbols become imbued with meaning.
Yes.
The classic example of that is the first episode begins with, obviously, first of all, the characters in it are largely actual people who actually inhabited the early Deadwood settlement. And one of those was Wild Bill Hickok, who at that point was a legendary gunslinger, who was sort of one of those classic, a real-life version of one of the classic archetypes of the wary gunslinger who's killed people and is notorious for it, but just wants to make some money and live peacefully, but cannot escape their reputation. Which, as we talked about with Gunsmoke, is a trope in all westerns, and in some cases was based on real guys, and he was one, and he was killed by a disgruntled poker player, and the town has to figure out how the hell are we going to deal with this since there's no law in Deadwood. That's one of the first lines in the show is someone saying there's no law in Deadwood. And so they convene. So Alex Swearengen, who is the local brothel keeper, convenes a town meeting to decide what the hell to do about it. And they decide to hold sort of a impromptu trial there. And during the meeting, they bring out some canned peaches to give everybody, just as a thing. And then when they held another town meeting later, someone asked, "Where's the peaches?" And peaches become a symbol of sort of this new, like civic tradition. And the show is just shot through with these moments of accumulated resonance around symbols and acts and rituals that people choose over time to invest with meaning in order to live with one another.
Yeah, that's so. I ran through a ton of the first season in a very short time. Like, I dedicated a day to the first season because the Hearst storylines are my absolute favorite in the show.
Yeah.
We're gonna get to Hearst later. Hearst is the greatest TV villain I've ever seen.
Absolutely, Major fucking Dad. Who'd have thunk it?
Yeah. No, just goes to show. Yeah, it's just like how The Sopranos is filled with character actors who star on something for 12 years and are amazing in leading roles. Maybe the great villains of tomorrow were on How I Met Your Mother today.
Probably, they're probably Twitch streamers.
Yeah, who's to say, Hassan? But I watched the first season a lot because I was thinking a lot about Gunsmoke when I was watching this.
Yes,
because we were going to draw the through line between this and Gunsmoke, and what I found, it wasn't that Gunsmoke necessarily came up short. And I don't really think that's a fair criticism to say like, oh, the first prestige serious TV show kind of ever isn't as good as Deadwood. Like, yeah, of course it isn't. Like, what the fuck do you expect?
They were inventing the genre.
Yeah. But I did think, like, I tried to sort of evaluate them thematically. And the thing I forgot with this first season is so much of it is about them trying to establish law and trying to establish a society with, like, parity and rules and, like, basic trust and things that function on trust. And how, okay, like, Gunsmoke, it's not that it doesn't deal with these themes, but Gunsmoke is more about the individual's quest for meaning.
Yeah.
And I think that's very much a product of its time, because when Gunsmoke was made, it was sort of like, it's the height of the American international mafia.
Right.
We could knock over fucking anyone.
Yeah.
We've never been stronger than we were when that show was on. I don't know if there's a 1-to-1 correlation, but I'll leave that to an economist or a freakonomics.
Yeah, you gotta freak it. You gotta freak that economist.
Yeah, it's a freakonomics question, but and it makes sense that for when the American imperial mafia is the strongest, and for when domestic industry is the strongest, our economy is the strongest, all people would feel that they're lost as individuals, and they would have to harken back to this time where none of this existed.
Yeah.
And it was impossible to conceive. And they would have to draw a parallel between, this time of immense bounty that will never be replicated ever in any country, and this time of intense austerity, but complete freedom, where you could break all the norms of society that was more Eastern, but you ended up sort of trying to enforce your own guidelines, enforce your own bumper lanes around your life, because you found it was meaningless without those. And you found what I found with the character of Matt Dillon was his weariness and the murkiness about his past. What that implied to me was he had a past where he lived without his admittedly sort of idiotic and cobbled together moral code. And it's what made him miserable and traumatized, and made it so his only job could be like killing people and beating up gunfighters.
Yes.
But it's not really about the town or really the crafting of a society. Like, it exists, and it's implied that, like, Matt Dillon is barely holding it together. Like, like we talked about in the last episode, he always gets there after something awful happens. He never prevents it.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
That's not the point. This evil is going to happen no matter what, and he has to stop it. And thank God he has this evil, because it's the only thing sort of constructive he can do, even though it's debatable how constructive it is. Whereas Deadwood, it's made still in a time of bounty. This was written and produced during the War on Terror, during post 9/11 America, which is still, an incredibly powerful, wealthy nation. But and I think years later, we're going to recognize this in all fiction, especially prestige. Everyone recognizes that it's coming to a close.
Yeah.
That we're not trending upwards. And The Sopranos is definitely about that. But I think Deadwood, it's not about that decline, but it is about the how vaporized our social connections became. How we built this thing up. We built up towns like Deadwood. We cobbled together a society that's a combination of, like, old English common law and the moral codes of whatever traumatized freaks had the most guns or whatever. And it worked in some ways, didn't work in others, but there was a common desire for a livable society and for the roles of people in societies. But it was in the same way that Gunsmoke is about taking a look at that same era and sort of giving people this insight for this quest to individuality that sort of mirrors the one that the viewers had, even though it's under drastically different circumstances. I think Deadwood is about, it's a quest for social bonds and social connection and human connection, and very Anna Karenina-esque in that idea that, the meaning of your life is how you connect to others and your relation to others. But it's addressed at a society that is post that existing.
Right.
And those are going away.
Yeah. And so that's what makes it so poignant, because as, the social fabric is knitting out of chaos, you see, the promise of it, but you also see the corruption embedded in it. Like the fact that the whole project is inherently a crime. Like it is an expropriation of Indian land for the pursuit of individual gain. But then once that is bracketed off in the minds of everyone basically in the town, because they don't see it that way, because that those ideological blinders are what allowed westward expansion to drive, was the refusal to recognize Native Americans as like a fellow member of any kind of social grouping. And so that already taints the enterprise. But within that structure, there are these genuine yearnings towards civilized behavior. And I think that like the arc of Al Swearengen's character is really fascinating, because he is one of the very few anti-heroes in prestige television or film that I can think of, who over the course of the this runtime of the show is softened significantly, but not in a way that is just a consequence of audience familiarity with him. The way that, like, let's say Michael Scott, for example. Michael Scott is supposed to be your nightmare boss, like an awful person with no social skills, who uses his authority over you as your superior to basically make you be his friend and do emotional labor for him. But over time, he turns into the lovable boss that he thinks he is, just because you've been in the same room with him for 8 years, and it's essentially Stockholm Syndrome. But Al Swearengen is literally civilized by his participation in society, but there's still gold being mined. There's still Indians out there to be tamed, and eventually, in the form of Hearst, there is monopoly capital to emerge to alienate everyone from every element of what they think they're building there. And watching that from the standpoint of the post 9/11 America is to see the promise and the inherent the inherent tension in like the American project in one of its like crucial birthing crucible.
Yeah, Swearengen is, if you can only look at this show through the prism of one character, it has to be Swearengen. He is the most interesting character as far as approaching the central questions of this series about the participation in society and the civilizing nature of laws and order and everything. I mean, I love the character Bullock.
Oh yeah.
Even though he's a bit two-dimensional, I love him as a character. He's a smarter version of Raylan Givens, another Timothy Oliphant character. I like him because he is, I think a lot of Deadwood is deconstructing myths. Mm-hmm. And I like Bullock so much for that reason, because he is, the badass cowboy, lawman, gunfighter kind of. But he's the most fucked up man in the town.
Yes.
He's so fucked up. Like, my favorite Bullock scene has always been after McCall has killed Wild Bill Hickok, and he's in that holding pen with the pigs, and Bullock comes in to like scream at him and nearly kill him, and McCall goes, "Why are you crying?" And it's like, I've never seen a show do that, where it's very realistic that someone gets so mad they start crying.
Yeah.
And Bullock does this a few times. Like, they invert just a very simple thing because you can tell, like, I think like any prestige show, I think less with this one because it's a little too wordy. I think really dumb people, like the sons and daughters of the lawyers and doctors who have HBO, watch this and we're like, I'm just like Seth Bullock. When I get pissed, I get fucking quiet and I kill somebody. But that's easy to do with Tony Soprano because he's very charismatic and everything. But with Bullock, he's not charismatic. Like his initial sort of flirtations with Alma Garrett are so funny because he's so stiff and like it's like he's mad at his dick for being hard.
Yes.
Yeah. Like the way, watch that first scene where he meets Alma Garrett. Like the way he says, "How do you do?" is like, oh, he's like, he doesn't know what he's feeling.
Yeah.
He's like a 12-year-old boy.
Yeah.
And like people have criticized his performance by Oliphant, but I think it's the perfect performance. Like I have known so many fucking Seth Bullocks in my life. Not lawmen or gunfighters, but like very masculine guys who are overwhelmed by their emotions and they're mad at their own emotions for it.
And so they have to suppress them. They have to their life mission is to, like, they seek order because it is a way for them to subsume emotions that they are incapable of accessing. And that makes them, it's the double-edged sword. That this show is filled with that. Like you see people who are crucial to the foundation of like the building of a social order, but the things that motivate them towards that goal also undermine their ability to really participate. And with Seth Bullock, you see someone for whom order is an end to itself because it is the end that allows him to be able to operate without just killing everyone he sees.
Yeah, and that's absolutely what he wants to do. Like I think he's a very clear, I would not say like intentional analog to Matt Dillon, though maybe. I mean, Gunsmoke was a big show when Milch was a kid, but I think he's a more adult version of Matt Dillon, who is already a pretty adult character for his time.
Absolutely.
But yeah, like neither of them are cool. Neither of them are cool guys. They're both wrecks.
Nope.
They're fucking wrecks who need this or they will be mass murderers.
Yes.
And they already are. But yeah, I also, the other thing I like with Bullock is he's the only character, one of the only central characters who doesn't speak in this sort of flourishing Shakespearean dialogue.
Yeah.
Like the Deadwood, like a lot of Deadwood to me is about sort of the confidence game as one of the, if you're putting the spices together to make the stew of modern America, just conning each other.
Absolutely.
Is a huge part of it.
Yes.
Yeah. And that flowery language that everyone uses, that in itself is a con.
Yeah.
Like Swearengen, who's initially like our biggest con man, he's a master of that. Like he speaks in these beautiful, just paragraphs of like flourishing metaphors and like just he has an incredible diction and there's this amazing rhythm to how he speaks even when it's vulgar, with the character E.B. Farnham, one of the funniest characters ever.
Absolutely.
E.B. Farnham,
a grotesque named Farnham.
A grotesque. That's such a fucking good line. Farnham is cowardly and stupid, and so no positive qualities. Farnham has zero.
Yeah.
But he speaks in these amazing soliloquies, especially when he's trying to like just do something terrible to someone. Everyone pretty much has them. But Bullock, I mean, the side characters of the gem don't. Like, there's Trixie. Trixie doesn't really do it. But
I just want to say one thing about that. I was a line that I came upon watching it again is there's a bit where he makes an offhand gesture towards he says something and a woman in the store says, "Oh, that's Tennyson," and he goes, "I wouldn't know. I have a book of quotations that I read and make effort to forget the authors." Just wanting to grab up as much flowery language as possible and just divorce any idea that it came from anyone else, that it was just like conning himself to con others.
I have a thing I want to get into what each character represents in American mythos, but like, God damn, I fucking love Farnham.
Amazing.
And we'll talk about what he represents later, but he's one of the funniest characters ever, and giving him a gimp that he abuses.
Richardson.
Poor Richardson. Bullock does it. Bullock doesn't speak in these terms, though. And you would consider Bullock a higher form of life than, say E.B. Farnham, but he refuses to play this game. Oftentimes, like the recurring theme with Bullock is him not playing the game because he's too pissed off.
Yeah.
And it often, like, it harms a lot of people that he can't do it, but he can't hold it together.
Because, like, he can't, the false face necessary to engage at the rhetorical level, it's too undermining of his sense of control. Because it requires him to be loose with, his own actual emotions, which are always pissed, which doesn't go well with, trying to engage, with language that is ornamental. But yeah, the flip shot is that of that is that he ends up always having to resort to physical violence or the threat of it, because he just finds himself incapable of doing the kind of rhetorical outreach that you need to persuade people. Can't do it.
Yeah, and I think that's mirrored a bit in the character of Cy Tolliver, who thinks the exact opposite of himself. He thinks himself an expert game player.
Yes,
and he tries to use that flowery language that Swearengen does, but it always falls a little. He's just a little bit off rhythm.
Yeah.
And in the end, he plays way over his own head.
Yeah, that's because he's the mirror image. He comes in. He's the saloon owner and brothel keeper who opens a fancier, nicer place right across from Al's, and they are in many ways similar. They are criminals who have committed murder, but there is that connection that Al has to the other people in the settlement that grounds him, and that is expressed by things like his ability to communicate. That Cy, who is a fully isolated being, like Cy is like the nightmare American, the one who never gains any connection to anyone but himself, but is also smart enough to be able to pursue his interests with full competence, unlike a lot of the goof ups and unstable psychos who show up on the show. So, like, the most dangerous kind of person.
Yeah, I mean, and something I love in the comparison between Cy and Al is, I think one of the most narratively courageous things they do with the show is how awful they start out Al as.
Yeah.
Like Al, like the sort of inciting incident to so much of the show is the family of squareheads, the former and would-be future Minnesotans,
yes,
the Nordics who were slaughtered by, they say they were slaughtered by Native Americans, but really it's heavily implied that it was Swearengen's road agents, sort of his equivalent of truck hijackings in The Sopranos.
Yeah,
and he basically does a false flag here, and he just. He says he's going to give free drinks and women and everything to whoever brings back the head of a Sioux.
Yeah.
Like, just brutal fucking settler colonial shit. And to make him, to start him off like that, and then to make him, as you said, like a member of this community, softened in this way, even though he's still out, like he's still awful. He's still, to the very last episode of the TV series, he's still, killing people who don't have it coming. It shows a fundamental faith in the central message and mission of the show that Milch had. I kind of wanted to go through different characters and what they represent, though, in American mythos. And I kind of wanted to start with Farnham. I think Farnham, in a sense, sort of represents, like, the American small business tyrant.
Yes, absolutely.
He's constantly over his head, but he either doesn't notice or doesn't care, because everything he says is everything he outwardly expresses is different than his actual intention. He's always running games, like big or small, on people. There's always a scam going. He's constantly pleading poverty and being stretched thin. Like, the episode where they're setting up for McCall's trial, where he goes into the gem to do some terrible deal with Al, some awful thing, and then he just starts loudly bitching about how his cook is taking off for the day. He goes, I bet he'll sneak his way into here for this, and then he knocks a fucking bottle of liquor off the counter and goes, whoops, and leaves. But yeah, he's the small business tyrant. He's not making as much. He's not taking in as much as people like Cy or Alma Garrett or anything. But the intent is there. It's just like his imagination isn't quite big enough and he's not quite courageous enough. But he is very adept at ripping people off and just being a totally dishonest piece of shit.
Yeah, while always grasping for more money, complaining about his sorry lot in life without ever analyzing his awful behavior, and then, most importantly, expressing his frustration by shitting all over the people that he bosses around, his employees.
Yeah, including a completely benevolent disabled man.
Yes.
It's awful to him.
All Richardson wants to do is worship his elk god in peace.
Yeah.
And he cannot, because Farnham knows at a certain level that he is a figure of scorn, that people know that he is a grotesque, as Francis Walcott calls him. But rather than interrogate that, it's much easier to vent that sense onto somebody who can't say anything else about it.
Yeah, I love that. I love the small petty hierarchy of Farnham's world, because at a certain point, it's like he accepted, okay, I think it's the second or third episode where Al Swearengen is yelling at him and he goes, when someone comes at you, what the fuck do you do, Farnham? And he goes, well, I could gesture to you, Al Swearengen, who I consider a friend or at least a business partner. He knows his lot in life is to be shit on by these people.
Yeah.
He's like, well, that's just going to happen. And then I have the people that it's okay for me to shit on. That's just how it is. It's the caste system, capitalism.
Yep.
And I think it's perfect that he ends up being bought out by the symbol of ruthless monopoly capital in Hearst.
Yes. And especially now at the end point of this, when the American dream has been foreclosed, selling out to monopoly capital is really the last hope anyone has of making it out of a life of precarity, even increasingly at the level of small business owners.
I would, you know what? Let me take a step back. He's not a small business tyrant. E.B. Farnham is a Silicon Valley person.
Yeah,
he's running this shitty enterprise that in and of itself doesn't make any money, but his confidence games do. Treats his employees like shit. And the only dream is that someone who actually makes something
yes,
will buy him out.
Yep.
Just because he's annoying.
Yeah.
And the book of quotations, the authors of who be forgot.
Yep.
That is something a Silicon Valley guy would do.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Because they consider themselves like the signal font of, innovation, disruption, and knowledge in the world, which of course they don't even know that's true. They don't believe that's true, but others have to believe that's true to have faith in their projects so that one day somebody will buy them out at a wildly overvalued rate. Right.
They want to be bought out by our Hearsts, who are Bill Gates, Larry Ellison's, Warren Buffett's,
Bezos,
whatever,
yeah.
who are as awful as Hearst, but through the modern science of public relations have learned not to come off like that.
Yeah.
But there are other characters I want to get into and what they represent in the American myth, but we have to get to Hearst. The greatest, like we said, the greatest villain in the history of TV.
Absolutely.
Let alone prestige TV. And he's unalloyed capital.
Yeah.
That's all he is.
Yeah, no, that's it. He is acquisitiveness without any refinement, because he was the man who made his money through as he said, because he was the boy the earth talks to. He actually was able to just pull value from the earth in the form of precious metals, and that godlike power he then used to expand that his purview essentially wherever he wanted to. He ended up becoming a senator and becoming a media magnate. His son was William Randolph Hearst.
Citizen Kane.
Yes, and he also he really is a prototype for like Daniel Plainview, in that he the person who went to the West to make their fortune and then just became over time insoluble with that fortune. Like the prerogatives of acquiring it subsumed everything else in their personality.
I was wondering what your interpretation of this scene is, because I don't think the character Walcott represents a ton in American mythos, but I do think he represents, like, how should I put it? Walcott represents the antisocial impulses of capital.
Yes.
That fall in love with those antisocial impulses and that ability to do harm.
Yeah.
And that ability to take life and impart fear in people. And they make it very explicit with Walcott getting a sexual thrill out of it, being that that's the only way he can get off.
Yeah.
That scene where Walcott says, "The earth talks to me too. It tells me there are no
There
rules.
is no sin." Yes.
There is no sin. Yeah. That Hearst is disgusted with it in a sense, in the sense that it may make him look bad or impact his bottom line and gets rid of him. I like this because it's, to me, how I interpreted this. And interpreted as part of American mythos is this was unalloyed capital realizing that with all the affectations stripped away, that's what it is.
Yeah.
That's how it appears to people. And it's the impetus for being a media mogul, for public relations, for everything that a guy like Hearst would have now.
Yeah. But at the time, it's crucial that when Hearst comes to town and he hears what had happened, where Walcott had gone mad and killed a number of prostitutes in Deadwood, like he had done in Mexico earlier, which is intimated in the show, that he has to cut him loose, because that element of capitalism must always be softened. It always must be, or at least have the appearance of being contained in order for the larger because this is the period when Hearst is trying to slowly buy out all of Deadwood's gold claims and turn it into a company town, and he can't have a guy running around cutting prostitutes' throats, so he has to cut him loose. But it's clear in their interactions that while he is kind of off-put by the sexual frenzy of Walcott, more than anything because it shows his lack of control and his lack of focus on acquisition. As he says, I care only for the color. I care only about getting the gold. This other impulse is alien to me. And while capitalism and the power of controlling capital or influencing it can give you license to do things like that, it must be constrained in the greater interest of continuing acquiring. And so Walcott has to be cut loose, which then leads him to the most satisfying moment in Deadwood, when the whole town is having their party and just unceremoniously fucking hangs himself out the window of the boarding house.
Yeah, no family, no descendants, bloodline wiped out, dead in Deadwood. So my interpretation of the character of the owner of the central gold claim in Deadwood, Alma Garrett, is, I think it sort of warrants like an interpretation that you can only get with hindsight. I think she sort of represents like the decline of the old money Yankee and their unpreparedness for frontier capital. Yeah. And yeah,
I think that's true. Yeah. Yeah. Like, I mean, her husband coming in there and getting just absolutely buffaloed by Al and then murdered. And then just by chance, the bad claim that they had scammed him with, it actually has a ton of gold on it, which makes Alma the inheritor of it, and she is absolutely incapable of dealing with the forces. And she tries, and there's a valiant effort, but by the end of the series, it's clear that like that independent element is gone. And of course, those fortunes were also built with the same horror and with the same ruthlessness that the frontier capitalism was. But the people administering them by that period had been refined by distance from that moment, which meant when they come back face to face with the realities of that primitive accumulation, they are incapable of confronting it.
Yeah, no, it's the American interpretation of the dynastic cycle idea.
Yeah.
Or Strauss, to bring it back to Gunsmoke.
Mm-hmm.
They're softened by the civilizing elements that they can buy themselves into. over centuries. I think we're pretty clear on what Bullock represents. Just oftentimes directionless rage and the impulse for violence and the need for order. Tolliver, yeah, I guess Tolliver is more the small business tyrant maybe than Farnham is.
Yeah, well, he's the like a higher level. He's like the more successful version. He's more competent. He's more able to contain himself, and he's more refined. Like Farnham's attempts at appearing worldly and literate are very transparent and kind of pathetic, whereas Cy is able to project, if not refinement, power and self-confidence in power, which is what Farnham doesn't have. And so that's the difference between, somebody with a multi-level marketing scheme, scrambling to stay on the top of the pyramid, and somebody who, say, has a regional chain of car dealerships. Yeah,
I would say Cy Tolliver, he's like Mike Lindell.
Yes.
he's someone like that. Like EB is like, a guy who owns one of those strip mall Trump stores where you can buy a bunch of gaudy American flag hats. Whereas, Tolliver's already made it, but he has the insecurity of knowing what's above him. And there's a reason why he's not up there. He can't beat those guys at the game. In the end, he starts trying to run a game on Hearst the moment Hearst gets in there, pretty much. And we all knew how that was going to go.
Yeah. He had no chance. Yeah. And he had that confidence made him think that he could be a match. But that confidence is born on the back of ignorance. He doesn't know what he's up against until it's too late.
Yeah, Tolliver's insecurity is the most interesting to me, because when Joni when she leaves the Bella Union to start the Shades of Me, just the horrifying emotionality that he reacts to it with. It's like Hearst had the capability to be hurt by people, and he does through the course of the show, and he's hurt by the fact that he's not a member of society.
Yeah.
Like, there's that scene where he cries about how he can't connect to people. But if that happened, if someone left him in that way, he would just fucking kill them.
Yeah.
Ruin their life.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's done, and he forgets about it. Tolliver, it just starts a pathetic spiral. A pathetic one. And he doesn't tie up his loose ends. Andy comes back and fucking stabs him.
Yeah.
Doesn't kill him, but
he can't
viciously traumatizes him and makes him even more paranoid.
Yeah, because that being in that middle position is always what's going to agonize, because you don't have the stabilizing and centering influence of a network of people that you can trust. You have to rely on your own wits and your own power, but those are limited by circumstances and by how much capital you've accumulated, which means you are just always on the knife's edge. And that's why he is such a one of the most clearly agonized characters, and as a result of that, one of the most threatening and dangerous.
Yeah, I guess finally, I would say that Al just sort of represents America, the idea of America more than anything.
I think so. He's the heart of the show. Like, if the show is about the foundation of America, it makes sense that the character you're dealing with, this guy who came from nothing, went to the woods to make his fortune, saw everyone as a mark, but also recognizes the absence.
Yeah,
recognizing what he doesn't have, and then seeks it out, but is only able to do that, from the position that he has, which is limited and which is filled with pain and mistrust. And so his steps and starts are he's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and his trajectory is one that is uncertain.
He has the elements of pure frontier violence and just brutal colonialism and exploiting racial hatreds and everything. He has that element, but he also has this sort of practical sense of pluralism at other times.
Yes,
specifically with Wu. Yeah. Which is, I think, a very clear allusion to America's use and exploitation of immigrants. But he's not I wouldn't say he's fully defined by being racist, even though it's a huge element of what he does and what animates him. He can set it aside, or it almost isn't. It isn't a central organizing principle for him in a lot of
when it comes to a few things. He's has no compunctions about doing anything to almost anybody. But yeah, there is this vacancy and there is this yearning, and that yearning ends up both his yearning and his brutality inform the laws and the rules and the order and the gaps in those laws and rules and order.
Yeah,
I think this Swearengen character and his trajectory, it's saying that the current institutional problems and rot of America, you can trace a lot of it back to the idea that, you go back further. People like Alma Garrett's family and Bram Garrett's and Otis Russell's families in the show, they were Swearengens of their time. And they were violent. They would do anything to anybody. They would commit brutal fucking acts of genocide. They would fuck over anyone. They would kill anyone. But every law, every fundamental law and rule and norm was those people trying to be normal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of the way you have to look at this show. You have to look at it through the lens of the characters. Like the story was always going to be sort of on rails in that it would have to be very tied to historical events.
Yeah.
But the characters are, I think, the clearest analog to not really even American archetypes, but like elements of the American soul.
Right.
To put it that way.
Yeah. Like another character, Doc Cochran. Like he is like the purest expression of sort of the highest idea of what America could be in terms of people. He's a person who is first and foremost out there to try to make sure that people don't die, but he is also, his experience of that has been torment his whole life. I mean, he was a Civil War veteran who saw more blood than any one person ever should, and as a result, his efforts to make the town healthy are just desperate, kind of, in a way, because like that heart is it's hard to beat in a land as savage as the one that they were building.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I guess I don't know. This is the last character I want to talk about. He's a relatively minor one. Reverend Smith.
Yes.
I had the most trouble figuring out what Reverend Smith quite represented. My initial thinking was just the corrosion and the making the sausage part of making America was so uniquely corrosive to him that it gave him a brain tumor, that he was a sheer being of morality and he couldn't take it. But that was my interpretation. But I don't know a ton about the Civil War. I know I have this small inkling about religious movements in that era. I was wondering if you had any insight in that, knowing a lot more about that than me, about what he could represent.
Yeah, no, I think you're onto something in that the Civil War ended up being hugely traumatic to the religious sensibility of America in general, because so much that was elementary to like the American conception of like a virtuous life and a Christian life was thrown into real confusion by just the sheer enormity of the violence. In fact, there's a whole book about this Republic of Suffering, about the way that like the violence of the Civil War changed fundamentally the way that people viewed religious, viewed their religion. Like it unmoored it from its old sort of quasi Puritan fixedness. Like one thing is that the thought was always that before the Civil War, is that you could achieve in America a good death, like a death that was peaceful and natural in a sense by being a good Christian. And there were no good deaths in the Civil War, and it was all 600,000 people, and the people who didn't die came back having witnessed that. And most unnerving of all was the absolute randomness of it. The randomness, the chance involved in who lived and who died in the Civil War, who got shot, who was standing next to the guy who got shot, who shit themselves to death in a ditch, who was able to recover from their cholera. And that left a a question at the heart of like what it meant to be a godly person in the land. And I think that Reverend Smith represents the incompatibility, you know, of what people understood to be a world that was suffused with the will of God, but was also brutal in a way that people had not thought was possible before then.
And in the end, he is mercy killed by the spirit of America.
Yes.
Yeah.
Shh, we've got this.
Yeah.
We've got this. Yeah, we'll build something new, but this has run its course. This religiosity has run its course in America.
I guess to sort of round it out, I would say Hostetler just sort of represents the plight of Black Americans post-war.
Yes.
And I thought that the end, I mean, he's a perfect analog for Black people in not just post-Reconstruction South, but also the industrial North, in that he is sort of the silent engine of that city. He runs, he does the jobs that no one wants to do, or a white person would not allow themselves to do. He's resented by the lumpen prole, Steve.
Yes.
Another great, hilarious character.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Racist Steve is wonderful because he is thoroughly repulsive, genuinely a pathological, monstrous figure, but also, because we know where it comes from, pathetic.
Yeah. No, a fucking loser. Objectively a loser.
Because the thing about social life is that what generates the possibility of social life is grace and forgiveness, the ability to recognize bad behavior, but instead of making it the basis for a violent imposition that ends up, you know, shattering social bonds, a effort towards ameliorating it. And what makes that possible is understanding what makes people like that. And the thing about Deadwood is the thing that makes it so heartbreaking is because it's this reflection of all the things that went into making America, and at every level, everyone is understandable, even if they're terrible. They're understandable. They're except for Wolcott, because Wolcott is sort of this, and Hearst, because they are inherently abstract figures. Everyone else is grounded in their situation, and the patheticness of Steve is what drives his hostility, because Hostetler is a man who has been able to make a living, make a successful business in the frontier, even though he is Black. And the fact that Steve has been unable to do anything with the same opportunity drives him mad. And then he gets kicked in the head because he wanted to fuck a horse.
Yeah. And I think Bullock's interaction with Hostetler and the character Samuel Fields.
Yes.
I was going to say his other name.
Yeah.
I'm not doing that. His interaction after the suicide of Hostetler, and Hostetler, his arc is fucking tragic. I mean, it's a lifetime of abuse.
Yeah.
It's not just the final rant from Steve. It's a lifetime of abuse, being shit on, and having this hard cap on where you can go. He just fucking kills himself. And Bullock, there was nothing he could do to stop it. There's nothing he really did do. And his Hostetler's only legacy is it makes Bullock angry for that day, and he does something rash and drags Hearst around by the ear. He's taking his anger out because he knows he couldn't have done anything, and he didn't do anything.
Yeah.
And now this good man is dead. Beyond just, the short time it ran, I think it's very weird that this show doesn't have like the same cultural purchase that a lot of other things did. I mean, definitely, a big factor of that is only going 3 seasons, but what do you think anything else is to explain for its lack of cultural penetration or existence in our cultural memory?
I would say one of the big ones is honestly just that, like, when the Western died as the American genre and then were replaced with the revisionist Western, they lost sort of a pride of place in like the American psyche that got replaced by things like cops and let's not forget crime shows. So like when you look at the Holy Trinity, like the early HBO prestige shows, the odd one out in terms of relevance to the culture as a genre was Deadwood. Like the Western had become a curio by then. So I think that's part of it. And I think the dialogue also does it, because it's much harder to easily quote and share by virtue of its Baroque complexity, which is what makes it so great to listen to and so great to luxuriate in. But that's not really the coin of the realm in that early, because you got to remember the context for prestige TV was the early internet, and and those shows provided like cultural fodder, like they were fuel in the engine for like creating a vocabulary for the internet. And because it was intentionally written as faux Shakespearean Baroque dialogue, it was almost designed not to fit into that mechanism, not to be transmittable the way that those other shows were.
Absolutely. And I think it's a hack thing at this point to talk about people who miss the point of The Sopranos, but it's immaterial now, because people who pride themselves on getting The Sopranos, all they do is post, like reaction pictures from The Sopranos, like making it so it looks like Tony Soprano or Uncle Junior. Any of these fucking terrible people agree with you.
Yeah.
And that's not like a bad reflection on the people posting it. It's a reflection on how charismatic and easily translatable those characters are.
Yeah.
They're fundamentally like funny and oftentimes likable people. Even Junior, who's like awful, is like fundamentally kind of familiar in this way.
You never had the makings of a varsity athlete.
Go shit in your head. He like with Deadwood, once you look a little deeper, everyone is familiar, not as someone you know, but as a part of your life now.
Yeah,
or someone you recognize from the news. Like, you can look at Larry Ellison and be like, there's George Hurst. You can look at the shittiest guy who owns a chain of car dealerships, as you said, in your suburb. There's Cy Oliver. You can look at like your dad or something and go, there's elements of Bullock. But it's not Deadwood's a very funny show, but its jokes aren't immediately relatable to any context that we live in.
It's true. I distinctly remember when I watched the show. Like I watched it on VHS, like the very last.
Oh my God! Wow.
Yeah. In like 2004, and I remember trying to tell people how good it was, and they'd say like, "Well, okay," and I would try to explain it, and I would try to explain like a scene that was funny or was good, and I just couldn't convey it because it was so everything is so deeply enmeshed in a context. And of course that's the point of the show, because the whole show is about context. The whole show is about that there is no such thing as a character, right? Like these are things that only are given meaning by their relationship to other people and institutions. And that very fact makes it very hard to pull things out to replicate as like memes or even just as conversation. And that, I think, limited its ability to transmit.
That's a great point. That's an amazing point. It's like, in a lot of ways, it's like, even though chronologically it's not pre-internet, it feels like a pre-internet show, because it's not like, I feel like everything made now, even like very good things that I like, it's sort of made for people to like rip an image or rip a scene or rip a GIF off of, or like take a moment from. Sort of the successor to water cooler moments, where it's like an easy billboard that you can put everywhere. There's nothing you can do like that for Deadwood. Like, What are you going to do? The scene where Bullock gets so mad he almost beats Otis Russell to death and cries, and then has like rigid rage sex with Alma Garrett. That scene's great, but it's fucking horrifying. Like, what context would you refer to that scene in?
Dude, you got to hear this scene where Al Swearengen soliloquizes about his dead prostitute mother while getting a blowjob.
Yeah, exactly. Oh man, this is just like when Al was passing the kidney stones and had a mini stroke. Yeah, it is. I mean, it's amazing to watch for how recent it is. How pre-internet culture it is, and pre-viral moment, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, even NYPD Blue, another Milt show, had a ton of those.
Oh,
that was partly it being a product of a network, but still.
And it had that breakout character in Sipowicz.
Yeah. There are no real huge breakout characters in Deadwood. Like, I would say to like huge fans of the show, Swearengen is, but it's not like, no one thinks of Swearengen like they think of even Tony Soprano or Walter White.
Yeah, and the thing is that that to me speaks to one of the real deficiencies of television as a medium, like why I genuinely do think that it is lesser in many ways than things like literature and even film, because like a show like Deadwood, right? It's trying to convey this idea of what goes into the creation of a social order, what even goes into the creation of an individual identity. But in so doing, you literally make the show less relatable in the way that shows need to be successful, to get the full thing. Like Deadwood was honestly in many ways too good at conveying what it was trying to convey to get enough people to care about it to justify its gigantic budget and get a whole 5-season order.
I think that's true. And, I think it's very poetic that for a show that's about how much of people's legacies are, my dad used to say this about autobiographies. An autobiography is just all the stuff you choose to believe is true about your life.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's all it ever was. Deadwood it's kind of like that. Myth and even history to that extent. It's all the stuff you choose to believe was true, all the stuff you ignored, all the stuff that gets obscured by distance and by the act of recording and by who's recording it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I anyone who's listening, I hope they've watched the show and then try to read read about the real life versions of the characters.
Yeah, no, Al Swearengen was a monster.
Yeah,
he was as bad as he is in the early episodes. He was way worse in real life.
Yeah, but the point is, like, it's probably a safe guess to say their lives weren't as dramatic. They definitely weren't as sexy. Everyone probably looked very bad, but they weren't as dramatic and didn't have as many moments of moral contusion and dilemma as these characters did.
No, yeah, it seemed very much like Al Swearengen just tried to make money, was okay at it. He kept getting his brothel burned down, and then he died trying to get on a train.
Yeah, it's a very ignominious end.
Yeah.
But who's to say, though, that there aren't many dramatic moments and moments of moral contusion that are erased from history because they were never recorded, as is the case with this show. I feel like this show is about the moments that aren't recorded and the myth that gets made.
Yeah.
And for Deadwood itself, it is an incredible accomplishment in TV.
Absolutely.
Maybe the best ever. I probably like The Sopranos more, but I may have to say this is the best one ever, and it's the best one ever for the reason that you brought up, that it was too good for TV.
Exactly. Like, that's why to me it's the one, because like I have a whole hobby horse. I've talked about how television has a way outsized role in people's cultural diet now, and that they can't do the things people want it to do. Yeah. And one of the best examples is that one of the few shows that actually came close to transcending the limits of television was ignominiously canceled after 3 seasons.
Yeah, and in that it is the moment that is not recorded and therefore not part of the myth, it doesn't really have that much of a cultural legacy.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that a lot was influenced by Deadwood. I don't see the DNA or footprint of Deadwood in a lot of things that are made after it.
Absolutely not.
I don't think I ever will.
Yeah.
I think it will be used and is used as a cautionary tale by a lot of people in Hollywood. Oh, you don't want to make Deadwood, do you? You want to make something that no one can gif or fucking share or relate to.
Yeah.
You don't want to make the best show ever that not enough people watch and it's too fucking expensive, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You sure still don't want to commit to like actually building a world. Like that fucking set they built was one of the big costs. It's like, just do something that's in a series of rooms.
Yeah. Like I don't think we'll ever have in a TV show ever again, at least on an American TV show. Maybe in a country where they have a sovereign wealth fund that they can, get some sort of write-off.
Get the Norwegians on that.
Yeah. Oh, God, imagine how fucking bad a Norwegian Deadwood would be.
Oof, boy.
Most boring fucking show ever made. But it's, yeah. I love that fucking set. Like, the Thoroughfare is one of the greatest set pieces I've ever seen.
Oh, God. It's Captain Turner and fucking Dan Doherty.
Yeah. And even, like, so many great moments, or the Al and Bullock fight, there's so many great moments there when Alma gets shot at, but it's just, like, always such a fucking tense place.
Yeah.
It is the most tense place I've ever seen on American TV, constantly. Every part I see it. The Thoroughfare, there's always something bad that's going to happen there, and you have no idea what the fuck it is. But, yeah, no, this is this is the part of history that won't be recorded. Unfortunately, I don't think 100 years from now people are going to talk about Deadwood. I think more people are going to talk about. They're going to be talking about far inferior shows. They're probably going to be talking about 24.
Ha! I mean, honestly, yeah. Like, you talk about things that have actual cultural residue.
Yeah. But I guess in the end, it was very true to both its central morals and the central tragedy that it's about.
Mm-hmm.
The things that don't exist because no one chooses to remember that they happened. And that is what will become of Deadwood, unfortunately. Unless everyone who listens to this, tell 100 friends. All of you, watch Deadwood, stream Deadwood, pirate it, put it on VHSs, mail it to your uncle. Let's get 100 million people watching Deadwood. Let's bring it back. Seasons 8 through 50. Let's make it like The Simpsons.
Yeah, let's get some Calamity Jane girl power memes going.
I want to see Doc Cochran do an ad for Joe Biden. Let's get it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I'm gonna add this to my yearly rewatches though. I don't know why I haven't. I mean, even I've seen the entire series like twice, and I still don't even watch it as much as I should.
Yeah.
Like, I'm one of the more vocal fans of it, and yeah, even I barely remember it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. We're figuring out what we're gonna do next week. I think we have to do a total break from this thread, the Gunspoke to Deadwood thread.
Yeah.
24 kind of got my mind bubbling. We'll see what we come up with.
Yeah, I think that could make sense. I mean, you want to talk about, I mean, it's orthogonal, but, you know, that's another show about, it's Marshall Dillon for the War on Terror in a way.
Yeah. No, yeah, we can do that.
Yeah.
Well, everyone, we will see you soon. Thank you as always.
Bye-bye.
And you know, don't die getting